Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Watts. Today I'm going to give a presentation on components. I know the schedule said Polymer components. By show of hands, have anyone worked with Polymer at all? Does anyone know what Polymer is? Okay. Well, I guess that didn't really matter then. So basically, Polymer, Vue, React, Angular, the whole lot of them, I've been working with them very closely for probably the better half of the last 2 years, and made a very specific decision not to go with Polymer because they are on the, I guess they keep promising one more month to release version 2.0, which has some very important changes that are going to make it work very well with Mura, or at least in this aspect. And so, seeing as though that they only released 1.8 after promising 1.0, I decided to go with my set of Vue components instead. So that's why it says Vue instead of Polymer. As I said, my name is Ryan Watts. My contact information is here. Twitter, GitHub, GitLab, LinkedIn, or any other dev-related social media network, I'm probably on it. Just rwatts or rwatts3, you'll find me there. So Vue, in comparison of frameworks, I'm going to compare it to Angular, Angular 2, React, Polymer, and Vue. Well, compare it to itself, but actually I am going to compare it to Vue because Vue is currently at version 2, which is a major change between version 1. The same thing with Angular 1 to Angular 2. So by a show of hands, does anyone here work with Angular, any one of these frameworks at all, currently in Mura as an application? Which framework do you work with?
Angular.
You work with Angular?
Switching over to Angular 2 right now.
Angular 2? How painful is that?
There's a little bit of a learning curve, but it's not too bad once you get going.
Absolutely.
I'm at a point where I'm kind of liking it now.
Okay.
But it took a little while there.
Okay, awesome. Any React people in here? There's got to be a lot of React people in here. Okay. And obviously no Polymer. So then there goes Vue. I'm assuming no one in here uses Vue. Good. That makes this talk not boring. All right, so the problem, and I'm going to introduce the problem before I introduce why I fell in love with Vue. The problem is, yet again, it's another framework. I just showed a screen with 5, 6 frameworks on it. We have another framework. There's a framework for everything. You get a new framework, as in going from Angular 1 to Angular 2, where they completely change the entire base of how the project works, and then you have costs, you have time, you have your return on your investment. How long is it going to take you to do that upgrade? How much money is it going to cost you to do that upgrade? Are the benefits even worth it? After you go to Angular 2 and they decide we're going to go to Angular 3 and we're going to go to some different form of TypeScript called Dart, if they decide to change Dart to TypeScript, whatever they want to do, how much more money is that going to cost us in the future? And how long will it be around? How long was Angular before Angular 2 came around? I don't know. It's a good question. And then the configuration. For me, working with Angular was difficult because I consider myself to be a pretty okay dev. Give me some docs, working with a framework, I can figure it out. I just never really figured out Angular, and it never really made sense to me, and probably because of lack of motivation, I didn't really have a desire or a boss telling me to learn it. But I've noticed the same thing when I worked with React. At first, I kept hearing people say, well, React is so simple, you'll get it, you'll pick it up, and it is very simple once you do pick it up. But at the beginning, they have such a high demand on structure for how, and they, as in Facebook, has a very high demand on structure as to how you're going to write your components, how is it going to work. And that's a good thing and it's a bad thing in some aspects. It depends on who you are. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So the question is, in regards to Mura, why even use components? What's the point? We have display objects, we have the JSON API, we have all the things that we need. So why use components? First of all, components are easy to distribute. If you build them the right way, a React component an Angular component or directive or a module, Angular module, or a Vue component, if you build it the right way, it's easily, you can distribute it and you can share it amongst other people. You can even share it amongst different projects. So that's the number one reason that I would say use components. Separation of concerns. If you're going to build something in an application, the same thing with Code Fusion components. You have a separate component and structure for that life cycle of whatever it is you're doing with that logic. And maybe that component has little bits and pieces that it's borrowing from another component, but at least it's organized in some kind of way. It's really easy to get lost in that nested world of divs. So, like I said, if it's written correctly, it's easier to maintain components. The ability to modularize and compartmentalize pieces of a complex structure. Things that we already know. Ability to build an entire application as a display object. That's the part that I like. Have an entire to-do application or an entire booking engine or something just completely in one component. Just my custom booking engine. Pass in some props to that component, and you have an entire booking engine that can talk directly with your Mura instance. And that's not a theory. That can be done. So I'm going to introduce Vue.js. Vue.js is a framework built by a developer named Evan You. And Evan You works for a company called Meter Development Group. I happen to spend a lot of time in the past couple of years working with the Meter Development Group. I built custom CMSs that talk to Mura. I built different things, different components for the community. I really liked their framework, and it was kind of based on their templating language was based on a framework called Handlebars. We all know that one. It's not, yeah, it's templating language, not really a framework. But anyhow, and so with that being said, the reason why I gave you that bit of background because Evan came from the perspective of knowing and understanding the power of React and knowing and understanding the simplicity of Handlebars and those type of languages and how to bring them together. Handlebars is great for a person that really doesn't need to do a whole lot of the logic part. They really just need to bring the data into the template and get things happening and get them happening quick. Maybe a designer, maybe a front-end developer or something like that. You don't really care about what's going on in the back end. You just want some quick way to get the data and get it going. So Vue it's lightweight. The production version of Vue is 25.86 kilobytes, give or take. It's approachable. It has very minimal configuration. And when I say minimal, I literally mean you can load the script, you make one function call, you instantiate a div, you have Vue. It's reactive. There's server-side rendering. It supports SSR, hence the example I'm going to show you. It's coming from the server. It supports it. And designers enjoy using it. So I've been told. So to get started with Vue, I guess I should probably, I thought I had a link in here to the docs. That was kind of rude of me. I'll provide the link. My apologies. So basically, to get started with Vue, all you need to do is load the script in your HTML head file or load it inside of the header of your application. You create a wrapper element, so it could be a div that's the first thing right after the body. You don't really want to wrap the body because a lot of other frameworks manipulate the body, and you just don't want to have two competing frameworks. Vue is pretty well when it's scoped to an element that it can grab a hold of. But if you snatch the class or the ID off of the element with a different framework, which a lot of frameworks tend to do with the body, then probably won't be a very good situation. And then basically, like any other process in the footer, you want to go in. I would say do it in the footer because that gives, it's not really a precedent that it happens at the very top of your queue if you don't want render blocking JS or whatever. If you're very organized and you're concerned about SEO purposes, you can place it in the footer. It's totally okay. And basically just call new view. And you call new view on the element that you gave the ID to. And notice the two hash marks there. And you must define a unique element on the ID. So you can't nest an ID, an instantiated Vue div inside of an instantiated Vue div because it'll get confused between which one it's supposed to instantiate. It does a good job at picking the first one, but we just want to be a little more consistent with our code. And then basically now any element that you add within that DOM or within that structure is now exposed to Vue. Vue treats it as it's a parent or as it's a child. So there are key points in Vue. There are directives, there are props, data objects, event lifecycle, single components, mixin, state management, templates, slots, and you can even write view components in a JSX style format if you would like, just strictly in your JavaScript file if you want, and you can even use ES6 if you like to do that as well. I'll save that one. So really quick, that's why I didn't pull that up, because I can't see my speaker notes. So right now, this is a very, 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 very basic example of using Vue. The component right here, this entire section is completely being drawn in by Mura's JSON API. It's a very, very basic example on how to use an element that I'm going to introduce here in a second. But basically, all it's doing is it's looping through, and it's just spitting those results back out from the API versus just pulling it from a custom element. Now it's being not a custom element, but it's wrapped inside of a display object, and all that display object does is just spit it back out. So Mura already has I believe it's a plugin that Steve wrote. There's already a plugin out there for Discuss, or Discuss, or however way you pronounce it. And here's an example of just going out on the internet, finding a view component that was already written, and all it takes is a short name and all of the code and all of the logic so we had to load an entire plugin to get this to work before. All we did in this instance was just load the script and then load the custom element, and then right out the door it just loads to the screen and picks up your short name and does all the logic that it needs to do to instantiate that div and get everything working. And an example of what that looks like, it was the most complex thing that I've ever written. So complex that I can't find it. There you have it. That's it. That grabs the library, that loads it in, that does your short name, and depending on what props it accepts, it might even have a prop for developer mode or dev true or whatever it is that you need. I know instantiating the library, I think you can pass dev mode and it'll let you use like localhost instead of having to have a direct domain name. But that could be the example of us sharing components. If we wrote a component or some kind of booking connection or some kind of library that we want to share with everyone else, we could simply just distribute it just like that, and we can pass it to someone. And so one of the things that I mentioned earlier was slots. And the reason why I mentioned slots is because you can define an entire, so for example, if we want to build a plugin with Mura's plugin system and we want to follow their style guide, we have to constantly go check every element every time we try to write a plugin to make it follow the style guide. Anyone here been through that before on a plugin? Okay, so one of the benefits of using Vue in your application is you can define what's called a slot. So we can actually take the entire style guide of Mura, we can take all of the UI elements, we can take the classes and everything, and we can define them inside of predefined Vue components, and then we can basically say Mura header, or Mura table, or Mura slider, or Mura anything that has to do with Mura's structure or Mura's style guide, and then basically we can just pass that right in as a prop, and we just give whatever information we want to give to it. So if we want a header and we want to put a date in there, if we want to put anything like that, just whatever the props accept, we can just pass that to the props, and it'll show. So a slot is the ability to overwrite that. So if you pass in the name or title and you have this style structure that we're going to use for the header, in Vue you can actually pass in a root or a child element in there and give it a name, and you can say slot name equals header, and then you can completely overwrite only that piece of whatever it is that you're overwriting in Mura. So yay for that. That'll be great. No, I do not have any examples of that yet. But on that note, I will introduce Mura View. So Mura View is a GitHub project that up until today was private. Well, literally this very second, in a couple of minutes. It's a library that's going to be dedicated to building, and all of these things that I just talked about, it's going to be dedicated to building these components for you to go and download the JS file, load it into your application, and have access to these exact components that I was just talking about. One of the components that has already been built, one of the ones that I demonstrated, it looks very, very basic, but I'll actually show you the source code for it, is the Mura query and Mura feed. I don't have an example of Mura feed right now because I'm not really happy with that. So that'll be available when you go check the library. But Mura query is available right now. If you were to go to the library and you were to load Mura query and instantiate a div, you can actually use it, and I'll show you how it works. And it's in test. All of this is in early preview. So I would not do it in production until you actually see a release come into GitHub that says this is now production ready. But my plan and my goals are to bring in Mura query, Mura auth, Mura feed, Mura loop, Mura style, and anything else that we can possibly think of. And the idea is, instead of taking the JSON API and writing all the JavaScript for it, because we all love JavaScript, I know I do, you can literally hand some of these tasks over to your designer or to a front-end developer or whoever you want, someone that might not be a back-end developer or someone that might not feel very comfortable with JavaScript. And they can literally just write a custom element and pass some props to it, and then they will get back data, just like that. They don't even have to touch JavaScript to do this. Felt like I saw a bunch of faces cringe when I said that. So here's an example of Mura query. Basically, all of the props that Mura query takes are exactly the same props that the JSON API takes. And what it does is you pass it a source, you pass it site ID, you pass it fields, you can pass it the ID, and that's the thing. The ID is specific to the component itself. It's not something that goes over to the JSON API. So I'll make sure I put that specification in the docs. But you can pass in, I think, cached within. You can pass in all the information that you can pass in with the JSON API. You pass that in here, and then basically what that does is the component sets a scope of results that's only scoped within itself. So your data will not bleed out into another component, or it won't just be sitting in a global scope in your window. It's actually going to be scoped to that one component. So once you write your query, notice that the Mura query tag and the Mura query tag on the bottom, but it has a template tag in the middle that says scope. You pass in results, and all of the data that you just fetched for and you wanted to use or whatever you want to do, you can load in another component, or you can just purely write HTML right in there, and you now have access to that entire query, just right inside of the element. As you can see, there are directives there for Vue. I'll go over some of them. V4 is basically, it's a loop. It's like a index item. And it's going to be the scope of, this is the part that I'm going to try to clean that up. I don't know. Results.results.items. Seems a little redundant, doesn't it? So yeah, that's why I said it's not exactly, I wouldn't use it in production, because some of those things are going to be breaking changes. That's just me being lazy and just spitting results.results out instead of figuring out why results are nested in results. But any questions about your query so far? Does it seem kind of unreal? Yes, it does.
It's just like a normal Mura template.
Yep. And you can actually, let's say you didn't want to run a Mura query. Let's say you just had a Vue div and you, or a Vue component, and you already did your loop with regular Java, or with what is it called? The Mura scope. Like, let's say you just did it straight from the Mura scope instead of using JSON API. You can actually go ahead and put your elements in there, and you can load the data that you got from the Mura scope right into the component, and it'll be available once it loads on the client side. Okay, again, questions? I think I went a little fast there. Oh, I guess I can share the repo. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. So the query, the library, so you can write your components in the same way you can do JSX. You can write your components in .view files, which basically will get, you need Babel and Webpack and all that stuff, and it'll transpile it over to a nice minified JavaScript. And that's the source that's actually available. I actually provide browser, common, and minified versions of the source. So if you are writing an application that's not inside of, like if you're not using Node, you're just actually going to just load it right in the browser. You should use the browser for that, unless you're using require, and you can use the common JS file for that as well. But basically, all we're doing here is we're instantiating our own component. We are passing in, we're defining the props that it's allowed to accept. We set default values for what it does. Not for what it does, but we set default values for the ones that should have default values. For instance, you know, if you can't pass entity name as empty, or it'll tell you that you have invalid params. So we want to make sure that under any circumstance, we could do one or two things. We could make it required and throw an error if we try to load it without having the right properties, or we can just set a default value to the one that we know that Mura sets a default value to. In this case, I went with what was in Mura's docs. I literally looked at Mura's docs and I built this component just based on what was in the JSON API docs. And almost every component that we build going forward can actually be done this exact same way. And then Vue has a set of lifecycle hooks that it has. You can call events when the element has been mounted to the page. You can call events when before the element is mounted to the page, which just figured something out. Excuse me, sorry about that. This is actually very important as to why it's not production ready right now. 3. That's my mistake. So I'm not afraid of it. I called this entire fetch of the API before the element was mounted to the page. And that's why it took 10 seconds to load. So it's things like that that I like about Vue, and I'm not going to blame my incompetence on Vue, but the fact that the source code, literally it's broken, the events, the life cycles, the way that it works, the way that you load your components, the way that everything works, it's actually broken out in a very easy to comprehend and understandable fashion. So here's a link to Vue's docs. Just go through the lifecycle hooks, so that's pretty important. Okay, so you can call before created, mounted, kind of very similar to what you can do in React, but it's just in Vue. All right. Yep.
So since this is all in JavaScript, right, and you can essentially just build an entire static HTML site completely separate from this HTML server that Mura rests on. You just basically Mura in the cloud and build a site out.
That's exactly what my presentation tomorrow is all about. It's about that, and it's actually I've used Meteor for quite some time to build anything non-Mura related, and ever since Mura 7, I have not had the need to build anything in Meteor anymore, because the ending part of that is that Mura is effectively a backend as a service now. I truly feel confident that it's a backend as a service. And having it marry up with Vue, that one of the other points that I was going to make with Vue is that it's reactive. So you can use I'll give an example here. Better yet. Perfect. You guys can see this okay, but this is very bright for me, coming from a black screen. Oops. Can anybody spot the mistake for me? Am I just having a bad code day? Oh. Yes. Thank you. Okay, so Vue has two-way data binding. So basically, if you put vModel on any input element or any form element, and you give it a prop that's instantiated within itself, it will bind to that. So if you fire a click event off of something, or if you bind it to a form and you want some kind of validation to kick off before that, you can actually two-way bind those different elements together, and you can pass. You can emit events across to each other to make sure, like, so if you want to fire off your validation on the server side and then you want to wait for some kind of callback to happen before you actually submit the form, you can emit an event that will actually go handle that data on the server side, obviously using prevent default, and then whatever you get back on the success, then you can actually go ahead and proceed with submitting that form. One of the examples. So in this case, the greeting at the top says Mura plus Vue equals success. So I didn't have to do any kind of custom logic. I didn't do anything crazy. Vue just handles the binding, and it keeps a very good scope of what element belongs to what. And those kind of data bindings come in really handy when you have things like form elements, or if you have, like, maybe you want to write a slider and you have images on the bottom that are going to be buttons that control, like thumbnail buttons that you want to use to control the sliders or the view or whatever you can do like that. Using vModel in some of these instances is extremely fast. I mean, I know the JavaScript is not that hard to work with when you're doing it like that, but it's actually makes things a lot faster for you and a lot easier to work with. Okay, so with that being said, I don't think I've ever done that before. How do you switch a project from private to public? Go down? I'm glad I decided to do that here. Pull requests are welcome. Yeah, pull requests are welcome. The very next thing that I'm going to try to work on is I want to try to get the entire JSON API. I want to get post. I want to get all of those things completely finished and tested before I will say that it's really ready to go in production, because I kind of think you're going to need one or the other at some point in time. You can do queries all day, but if you can't do anything at that point, then it's kind of pointless. So I would say that if you all are using Mura components or Mura Vue components in your applications and you have feedback or you have suggestions, please let me know. This is one of my top priorities right now. So I'm trying to, and it's very, very simple to pick up. Basically, everything you need to help develop with the project, it's already in the repo. You don't have to go do anything custom like that. It's a Node.js module. And basically, you just download it, you read the documentation on Vue, you go to the source directory, you write a component that does that connects to the JSON API, and then you run build, and that's it. All right, any other questions? Good? All right, thank you, appreciate it.